You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. On today's program, we're going to talk about a powerful principle that impacts society. It has impacted America heavily in the last 70 years. It has impacted nations all across Europe and Asia and all over the world. And this force is a spiritual force, and it controls, it dominates, and it enslaves humanity with the most horrific cruelty imaginable. So it's important to understand it so that we can effectively defeat it, and we can effectively defeat it. But in order for that to happen, we have to have the knowledge of how do we practically and specifically, how do we access the power, the authority to defeat this very demonic spiritual force, which is sweeping across America right now, even as we speak. It has swept across the world for centuries, and it is a prime agitator. It's a precursor of things to come. But again, it can be stopped. So this is Paul McGUIRE. You're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Help us spread this message far and wide. You know, I want to thank all of you before we get into today's program, because you enabled us through your financial gifts and contributions. You enabled us through your prayers and simple things like activism, where you made sure that on whatever platform you were listening to us on, you made sure to be a follower, a liker of the Paul McGUIRE Report, because as you know, anyone who tells truth in a unvarnished way is opposed. And many people don't understand that because they're never opposed. And the reason they're never opposed is they never say anything truthful. They simply say what's politically correct or woke or whatever the term may be at the moment. Well, then there's no resistance. But if you speak the truth and you confront lies, then you're going to be opposed. And one of the ways these groups, these organizations, fight against and attempt to block and attempt to destroy truth tellers is they do the same thing that they do in the political realm. They rig the numbers. So in politics, in an election, the devious side will attempt to affect the outcome of any given election by rigging the poll numbers electronically, by manipulating and falsifying the numbers electronically. And therefore, the people may know it. The media most likely won't cover it adequately, but they're rigging elections. And they've been doing this for a long time. Both political parties, by the way. Now, the other thing is that when it comes to social media channels, like we pay for a whole bunch of social media platforms to communicate our message on to people. But if you know the way the game works, you can calculate, you can measure mathematically when it comes to, for example, I regularly look over our numbers of likes and numbers of people watching or listening. I monitor the growth. I monitor, I compare to where we were in previous years. There's a whole bunch of numbers that I look at. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out when and if your numbers have been artificially or synthetically manipulated or distorted or altered by AI, artificial intelligence, and then things like computer algorithms, which are formulas created for computers to perform certain tasks like falsifying somebody's numbers. So we're hit with censorship attacks in the form of computer algorithms, bots, all kinds of AI technology. And then when you see or look at the numbers, you notice that there's an ever-present trend, which is simply this. If you're telling a lot of truth on a regular basis, you will either be deplatformed or they will erode your numbers artificially. And that means the numbers that they're posting for you are not really the true, accurate numbers. They've been altered. They've been rigged. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, number one is by doing that, and it's relatively simple for them to do that. By doing that, they block your message from being spread. And that's their number one goal. They don't want people, for example, telling the truth about certain things happening in our society, in our world. They don't want people to tell the truth about it because that would threaten their secret agenda. And in fact, the very existence of a secret agenda is hidden from the masses. And so they want the masses to stay in that scientific mind control, a term coined by Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. They want the masses to park their consciousness in a kind of trance-like state where they can't see or perceive the obvious. Now, they should be able to, but because of the social engineering technology and formulas being used upon them, and that's what we would call psyops, psychological operations, or psywars, psychological warfare. So that can be used, on an enemy outside of the United States. Psyops can be used against enemy nations, and enemy nations can launch psyops campaigns inside of America to destabilize America. And that is, generally speaking, known as psyops. But you can also, a dictatorship, a totalitarian regime of many kinds, can exercise psyops against the American people. And that's done all the time, by the way. And the purpose of that is, prime example, they don't want the majority of the people to know about, so many things, because it would expose what they're really doing. And so they don't want the people, first of all, to even know that there are powerful organizations with essentially unlimited financial power that are secretly functioning like puppet masters, and they are pulling the strings on the marionettes or the puppets. You've seen a puppet show, I'm sure, sometime in your life. Well, this globalist elite manipulates mass populations like puppet masters pull the strings on puppets. It's a control system. And so they don't want the people in various nations like America or wherever to know what's really going on. They maintain their control by hiding from the people the very existence of the entities, the powerful billionaire class, the institutions, the banks, the groups that compose, for example, a globalist-run government, which is the case in America, and it's been that way for a long time. So they hide that from the masses, and basically they're counting on the masses. As long as the masses have enough to eat, I mean, it doesn't have to be phenomenal food, it could be all junk food, but if the masses have enough to eat, hopefully decent transportation, maybe a car, if the masses have a place they can live in, they can call their home, and then they can fill the lives of the masses with all kinds of electronic entertainment, virtual reality glasses and every kind of satellite TV, premium packages, feature films, music, sports, all kinds of entertainment stimulus can be brought into households and homes. And so as long as people have enough to eat in terms of junk food or whatever, pizza or whatever, and they can occupy themselves with endless things, then they're going to be docile, compliant, and they won't question the orders or changes that they're being given. That is the secret plan. Now, by the fact that I merely brought it out into the open, the very fact that I've brought it out into the open makes me an enemy of the people or groups or organizations or AI entities, if you will. It makes me an enemy. Why? Why would I possibly be an enemy? Because if I'm speaking the truth and they're trying to brainwash people with lies, then they're not going to like and they're going to oppose anyone who's trying to communicate the truth to the people, because they, in their very depth of their essence, are absolutely terrified of the notion that truth tellers such as myself and a limited amount of others, there are many, many people, especially in the new waves of social media, people who just started their programs and stuff a couple of years ago, who just found out what the New World Order was just a couple of years ago. They're populating social media like crazy by the hundreds of thousands, I believe. And the people that control everything don't really mind those people to a variety of degrees, because they're what is called by many that have been telling the truth a long time, these people who just converted, so to speak, to the truth, those people that just converted into reality are, and I don't mean it to be derogatory, I'm just repeating what people are calling them. These recent converts to the truth are often called newbies, or other slang terms, because their knowledge is very shallow. They've just discovered the truth, but because they're able to acquire a powerful platform. Now, how do you think it is that they acquire a powerful platform? If they hardly know their subject matter, if they were just a couple of years ago hardcore liberals promoting the Obama campaign or whatever, and if just a couple of years ago they were laughing at the notion of a new world order and all that stuff, but now they've had this incredible conversion, and they have become the self-appointed experts in social media. How is it that they can acquire sometimes, hundreds of thousands of followers or millions of followers? How is that possible? Well, this is how it's possible. And I'm not saying this is the case regarding every single person. I'm certainly not saying that. But what I am saying is, once you begin to electronically rig the numbers, then you create an environment where you can, in a stealth-like, covert manner, using AI and bots and algorithms, in conjunction with the big, I'm not necessarily saying that these people are guilty of this, but I'm just using them as names to represent the names of giant companies. I'm not trying to pass judgment on them at this particular moment. I'm simply trying to use them as an illustration of the companies that I'm talking about. YouTube, Rumble, and on and on and on. These are the social media platforms. Now, the way the game is played, and you know this, is that the programmer or the host or the company or the entity or the individual who owns and controls a particular program or whatever that's going out and reaching lots of people, the more advertising dollars these programs can generate for, let's say, hypothetically, a Google or a YouTube or whatever. I mean, there's an endless list of powerful social media platforms. But the more money they generate in terms of advertising dollars, the more money these individual companies, these individuals, these newbies, the more money they make. And some of them on the top tier are making, $500,000, $1 million a year. Some of them have large staffs to handle all of their things on the internet. And how is it they're making such large amounts of money on a weekly basis, by the way? Cash flow of like $10,000 a week. That goes a long way. How is that possible? Because they have an invisible friend. They have an invisible friend that essentially is an AI, artificial intelligent system, a bot or an algorithm, and some kind of organizational entity behind them that is deliberately manipulating the numbers of visitors, watchers, likes, viewers, et cetera, that these people that I'm talking about, the newbies, are generating. But it's artificial. Those aren't really the numbers. Or if they are the numbers, or the numbers are close to the real numbers, they didn't get there into that high-level stratosphere of large numbers of viewers and listeners. They didn't arrive at that stratosphere level through hard work and good content. They had a little help from their friends invisibly. In other words, they were puffed. Now, I'm not saying this to speak badly of Billy Graham, so please don't misinterpret my intent. The only reason I'm using his name is that everybody is familiar with the story to one degree or another. When Billy Graham was just starting out as an evangelist, he held his first big crusade in Los Angeles, California. And his ministry, of course, was struggling. I think this was his first big crusade. And so his ministry was struggling financially. They were struggling to get people to attend the crusade. And I don't know how it happened, but a very powerful member of the elite class in America and the world, who owned endless amounts of newspaper chains. And he was, in his day, in his era, but this is before the proliferation of electronic or computer media. This is in the day that print publishers could control everything. And so his name was William Randolph Hearst. You've seen a movie about his life made in black and white, and it stars a famous actor that's no longer with us. And this guy had he owned the Hearst Castle, which is worth visiting if you ever go to California. And it's this incredible castle, incredible beyond the stretch of the imagination. And it's high up on the hills overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And this guy, William Randolph Hearst, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. And he would fly to his offices, for his publishing offices in San Francisco, and he would then fly home in the evenings to live in his castle, the Hearst Castle. So he heard about Billy Graham, and he gave an order to his massive company, his massive media company, his massive publishing empire. And he simply said to all the heads of his company these words, which were Puff Graham. And everybody in the newspaper business knew exactly what Mr. Hearst was calling for. Puff Graham meant promote Billy Graham like crazy. Put Billy Graham on the front page of all of our newspapers, and Hearst owned most of the newspapers. Put Billy Graham on the face of our newspapers with giant photographs, print nothing but favorable articles about him, and let our newspapers be given over, so to speak, to a full-fledged promotional publicity campaign that's totally favorable, and let's build up Billy Graham's evangelistic empire. So those words, Puff Graham, launched Billy Graham in LA and took Billy Graham from being basically an unknown preacher from the middle of nowhere. Billy Graham overnight became one of the most powerful, most influential religious leaders in human history, because the order to promote favorably, aggressively promote Billy Graham came down from a man who had the power to deliver it, and that was the publishing empire and owner of the publishing empire, William Randolph Hearst. And it changed history and it changed the world. My point is that often behind the empires of media, computers, the internet, social media, cell phones, satellites, AM, FM, endless platforms, there are also invisible hierarchies of power with infinite amounts of money. And they are very strategically controlling the culture, controlling the political beliefs of the American people, controlling the sexual beliefs of the American people, controlling things like abortion or pro-life, that you could just go down a checklist. And these powerful entities, using a vast array of all kinds of electronic media, computer media, AI media, they are controlling people's minds to a large extent through an all-powerful media. Now, the problem is that if that mechanism of power, if the ownership of all these media stations and computer companies and the YouTubes and the Googles and the Rumbles and, on and on and on, and network TV, all the new channels, TV channels owned by like Paramount and many other media companies, they have like secondary or third level channels that publish or produce movies and musicals and all kinds of stuff. It's endless. The point is, they can puff any individual group or idea that they want. And by the same token, they can promote and make anything a reality in America through their media persuasion power. But also, if they do not like a rising star, if they don't like a particular message, if they don't like a particular point of view, they can shut it down by doing the opposite of puffing Graham, they would release highly negative, subversive, destructive promotion. So promoting somebody in a bad way, you can take down a message, the messenger, a ministry, whatever you want. You can control people's thoughts. And it's a very potentially, it depends whose hands are doing the controlling. Potentially, it can become a very powerful global electronic dictatorship, that combined with principles of advertising, et cetera. So we're going to explore this, but there's something even deeper than that I want to get to. When you look at any nation in history or in recent times, when you look at America today, and we're going to examine this, the moment fear enters a society, the moment an escalation of fear starts to conquer the hearts and minds of the people, we the people, the moment the level of fear infuses itself in the spiritual atmosphere of a nation, so to speak, it has a chilling effect. And what we're going to dive into in a moment is not only the mechanisms that are being employed, but we need to understand that the Bible's very serious when it defines or categorizes fear for us. Fear is not, according to the Bible, fear is not merely a psychological mechanism or a psychological force. Fear at its bare essence, according to the Word of God, is a spirit. So the Bible says fear is a spirit. And so we cannot overcome fear as a nation or as individuals. And fear cannot be driven out of a nation or individuals. If you attempt to fight fear purely based on psychological mechanisms, you may have a minute, limited degree of success, but you will not be totally victorious from liberating yourself from fear or liberating your nation from fear until you come to the place that you accept what the Bible says about fear is true. And what the Bible has to say about fear is this, once again, fear is a spirit. So the only way we can conquer and overcome fear is to deal with it as it really exists. And it really exists as a spirit. It's a spirit of fear, a demonic spirit of fear. So fear is not, again, not just a psychological force. Fear is a spirit. That's why the Bible says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. When you listen to people, when you observe people, or if you happen to visit nations controlled by communist dictatorships, whether it's communist China, communist Cuba, communist Russia, or when you visit a nation controlled by militant Islam, or if you visit a nation or receive communications from a nation which is into like some kind of hyper-nationalist philosophy like Nazi Germany and the Nazis. They're in all these totalitarian regimes, whether it's a religious totalitarian regime or a communist Marxist totalitarian regime or a Nazi nationalist totalitarian regime, all of them are at their very core roots spiritually. All of them are dominated by and controlled by a very real and literal biblical and demonic spirit of fear. That's why people are literally terrified when they live, work, and exist in communist China or communist Cuba or communist Cambodia or communist Russia or Nazi Germany or a militant Islamic state. In those nations, you are terrified that you may be overheard saying the wrong thing. You may be caught looking or promoting the wrong thing on the internet. And everybody in that nation that lives under whatever kind of totalitarian regime it happens to be, they live a life of incredible spiritual oppression because the spirit of fear has been unleashed upon the people to dominate and control the people by instilling a horrific level of fear dominating people's minds, hearts, and lives. Now, many of you, I know, just because this is the way life is, we have all, to varying degrees, experienced having to fight against what is called a spirit of fear in our personal lives. It doesn't mean for a moment that we're possessed. It means, though, that we are oppressed in a variety of ways by a literal spirit of fear. And it's just like somebody bound us with chains and ankle bracelets in some kind of archaic old prison. We are bound in chains to a spirit of fear because we're always looking over our heads to see who's following us. What accompanies a spirit of fear is paranoia, but the paranoia is not unjustified. The paranoia comes from the proper recognition that there exists all kinds of hostile, electronic, digital, totalitarian forces spying on your every move, recording your every move, thought, and behavior pattern. And if you violate, even in the most minuscule way, if you walk even just little itsy bitsy inches away from whatever the ordained or planned path that the totalitarian regime has planned out for you, if you diverge from that, even on a microscopic level, you will be subjected to a series of horrible punishments, which it could include, like in communist China, depending upon your behavior, and they monitor your behavior 24/7 in what is known as the Communist Chinese Social Credit Score. And if you've ever looked at it, you can look on it at the internet, you'll see a running numerical score going up or down, and you'll see a person standing on a street in communist China, and then superimposed on that person, just like you were watching a football game or a basketball game, you know, in America, how they will superimpose over the athletes and the game. They'll superimpose running numbers, totals for the individual athlete, totals for the team that he or she may be on, totals for the competitors or totals for the opposite team. And all of these scorecard numbers appear in very fancy multicolored fashion that is literally superimposed upon the face and the body of the athlete or the team that's playing. So what communist China does is it utilizes a similar format of superimposing all these numbers, running total numbers, over the images of real people in real time. And it's monitoring you electronically. And this is coupled or linked to AI, artificial intelligence, on a very large national scale. And so since there is such a massive number in communist China of literally television spy cameras are absolutely everywhere, all over China, spying on the people every conceivable way, constantly. So it's like next to impossible to escape the all-seeing eye. And so if the cameras see you or the microphones hear you saying something negative about the communist government or the communist way, your score will change immediately in the negative. You'll start to lose points. Or if you're caught littering or committing any other infringement against the state, and it could be anything. And the communist state has all kinds of rules and regulations. A scorecard is being kept on you electronically and interpreted through artificial intelligence. And so what happens to people who begin to generate a score that consists of a lot of negatives, then they will be first, they'll be fined. Then they may lose their credit score. They may lose the credit score and the ability to rent an apartment or a house. They may lose their credit score in punitive manners because they spoke out against the persecution of Christians in their nation. And now they find that their credit score has been irreparably damaged and they can't rent anything to live in and they can't buy anything to live in. And then on top of that, they can't find employment because their negative social credit score prohibits them from being hired. So it's not some, cute, innocuous, superimposed football, basketball, type of see-through screen. It's not fun and games like a sports game. This is going to make or break people's lives in the most hideous horror story amplified on steroids, dictatorial, totalitarian, brutal dictatorship that, like all of the modern dictatorships, all of the modern and contemporary totalitarian regimes have figured out that in the brave new world that we live in, the totalitarian nations have become more refined in playing their dictatorial game. So you don't have the dictators of today necessarily screaming and yelling like Adolf Hitler and the Nazis with these in-your-face swastika flags and swastika banners, and everybody's going Sieg Heil, and raising up their arm and extended palm saying Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. And the way propaganda worked back then, everything, because the media back then was basically publishing newspapers, propaganda speeches by Hitler and others, feature films or film clips played between different movies, propaganda messages, radio with propaganda messages, posters with artwork that was propaganda messages. And so that was the state of the art propaganda back then. Today we have AI. Today we have computers and computer platforms and all kinds of electronic surveillance, unimaginable 3D synthetic realities, unimaginable back in the time of Hitler and stuff like that. So given this virtual reality, synthetic reality, where you can literally now manufacture lifelike images of people, of events, and you can completely manufacture them from absolutely nothing. And today, up to the very moment that we speak, the lifelikeness of you could create a virtual simulation of an atomic bomb going off in Manhattan, New York City, that would be so lifelike, so believable that nobody, not anybody, not even an expert, would doubt for even a moment the reality of what really is a virtual synthetic hologram image of a nuclear bomb being detonated in Manhattan. Because now the technology has brought us to the place that it is so lifelike that it becomes literally a new and totally believable reality. That's the world we're living in. So what you have to understand is, though, there are hidden control mechanisms behind all of this stuff. We live in an Orwellian, George Orwell was the author of 1984, about a futuristic totalitarian regime ruled by a big brother, where there was a electronic spy camera in every television set, constantly spying on people in their homes. And any deviation they may have practiced before the Big Brother regime, they would receive severe punishment, which usually involved both psychological torture and physical torture that is beyond anything you and I could conceive of in today's reality. And so he wrote a book warning about this Big Brother society, which was headed our way, and it's here now. Or the same thing with the author of Brave New World, who coined the term the scientific dictatorship. And that was Aldous Huxley. And there were many others who wrote similar style books. And they were all warning of futuristic dictatorships who had advanced so far in the level of the sophistication they had regarding scientific mind control that they could indoctrinate the average person, as Huxley said in Brave New World. They could brainwash the average person into literally falling in love with their slavery. So they know, well, even though they were in a totalitarian regime, Brave New World, Huxley foresaw the day where the brainwashing technology would be so advanced that the people could be brainwashed to such an extent that they would no longer see the dictatorial reality that they lived in. They would totally believe that they lived in the most wonderful world possible. And so they would be programmed to such an extent that they would learn to love their slavery. So they saw slavery to the state as something that was ecstatic, that was fulfilling, that they learned to love it. And therefore, if you've got your population loving their servitude, loving their slavery, there will be no revolt. There will be no revolution. There will be no resistance. The oligarchy that rules will rule without any contesting of their rulership. Why? Because the people are so entranced, so brainwashed with mind programming, that they literally have entered a state of consciousness and psychological being in which they have learned to love passionately their slavery. All right, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Everything we're saying today is applicable to America and the world on a global level. Everything that I've been warning you about for crying out loud, the true number of years is far, far greater than I normally say. You know why? My wife warned me of this, and she was right. She said, Paul, if you tell people the truthful number of how many years you've been specifically warning people and educating people about all of these things, if you tell people the true number of years you have been doing everything you can to wake people up, to spread revival, to win people to Jesus Christ, if you tell people the true number of years that you've been doing this, they will think you are lying, and you will turn them away. They will think that you're making it up and that you're lying. And I had already thought about this because I had said the true number a bunch of times, and people were polite. But I could tell that among the people that were polite, there were people who thought I was flat out lying and making up the number of years I've been doing this. And so my wife was trying to warn. My wife wasn't encouraging me to lie. But the problem is, if I told the truth, people would automatically assume that I was lying because they couldn't possibly believe that somebody could be doing this as long as I've been doing it. So when we get back, I'm just going to briefly tell you the number of years that I've been warning about Brave New World. I've been warning about 1984 in a Big Brother society, that I've been warning about the persecution of Christians and the loss of our freedoms, and so many other things that most people I knew didn't even believe, couldn't even conceive that the stuff that I was warning about even existed. Okay, I need you to help spread the word. The only way we're going to turn America around is to disseminate knowledge, which is power, as fast as possible. And Jesus Christ said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The way we set people free is with the truth. First, the spiritual truth, that salvation by faith in Jesus Christ is available to them and win souls. But secondly, we need to communicate the truth on how the Word of God and the truth of the Word of God applies to every dimension of our physical and spiritual reality. The way we sow seeds for revival and a biblical great awakening is to sow the seeds of biblical truth in the culture. And I need you to join with me in doing that. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We will be back in just a moment. You are listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. Okay, so I'm just going to say this very briefly because I've touched on it before, so I'll be concise, but I need to say it because it establishes a foundation. When I was approximately 8 years old, attending public school, PS 69 in Jackson Heights, Queens, I was in third grade. So I was in third grade. I was 8 years old, and this was decades ago. Okay, and so we had a choice, I guess, in terms of the books that we wanted to read. There were certain books that the public school required that we read. There were other books that I guess we could choose. I don't remember which. In any case, I ended up reading a book called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which was a fiction book which depicted a dark, futuristic, totalitarian dictatorship society that was ruled by a scientific elite. The people had no freedom. They were totally under the brainwashing and mind control of an elite group. And this society, women did not get pregnant themselves. Women did not allow babies to grow in their womb, and women were not allowed to give birth to babies. There were special places for that where the state would mix a sperm with an egg, and babies would be artificially grown to a large degree in some kind of factory. Okay? And the society had no Judeo-Christian morality. It definitely was hostile towards what would be called Judeo-Christian morality and traditional values. That was mocked at by the society. And so the ideal of the society in Brave New World was that everybody was like hyper-permissive, hypersexual, and just exploring the fringe areas of human sexuality. That became the norm. Pornography was everywhere, and sexual orgies were everywhere, and there was not even the most remote conception of a traditional marriage between a man and a wife, and one that was faithful, a faithful marriage. That was a non-existent concept, and there were a lot of other radical concepts in Brave New World. But the thing that gripped me most as a 9-year-old when I read Brave New World is I was raised in a atheist, secular, humanist household in New York City. A very intellectual household. A lot of movers and shakers would come to our house. We weren't wealthy. We were middle class. But all of my parents' friends were like really top level writers, artists, sculptors. Some of them were famous. One was a famous economist and other things. And they would have discussions in our household, which were very high level discussions. I would say that the normal discussions in my household would have been conducted between my parents and my parents' friends. These were PhD college level discussions, was the normal environment for me. So when you're soaking in a PhD college level series of discussions and debates and ideas, and you're absorbing that constantly. In addition, and I know this is a little bit off target, but I feel very strongly about this, because my parents and my parents' friends all had the habit of being big-time readers, and I was encouraged that if I wanted to know about anything, that I should study and get the books from the library and read, and not be dependent upon what the teacher would say to me, but think for myself. Now, that was the benefit of being raised in an aggressively intellectual. My father was an artist. My mother played classical music. Oh, yes, and my mother's classical music and the fact that her astute friends would come over and they would play classical music in the living room. You know, one person would play a violin, another, different instruments, but it was all high-level classical music. I hated classical music back then. I hated it, but because I was into rock and roll even as a young kid. But what classical music did to my mind, which I didn't understand the effect that exposure to classical music had on my mind until decades later, my mind developed endless new neurological pathways. The more neurological pathways that you have in your brain, the smarter that you can become, the more expanded your memory can be, the more astute your perception can be. The more neurological pathways that you have in your brain increases plasticity, a flexible, changing, growing, smarter brain. Okay, so the very fact that my mother would play classical music, whether I liked it or not, did me an endless amount of good. In other words, my brain was developed at a level it never would have developed by itself. I would have been subjected to merely dumbed down rock and roll music. But I benefited by the classical music that was played constantly in our home, because classical music exposes the child to numerous frequencies, but also it creates numerous neurological pathways which enhance perception, intelligence, memory, analysis, logic, reason, and you name it. All right. So that, along with the high-level friends that came to our household, this was my normal environment. So when I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, I was able to grasp the fundamental thing that happened to me in third grade with the reading of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was that many, many of the answers I was looking for about life, the meaning of life, about America, about our society, about people, about everything that I was looking for and could not find answers for anywhere. When I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, it was literally like I was hit with a lightning bolt, and I understood for the first time that the very society that Huxley was warning about, that allegedly was going to come about in the future, Brave New World. When I read Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, I realized right then and there that the warning of Huxley in Brave New World, that Brave New World had already started to come into full-fledged being right in front of my face through the TV programs we watched, like Leave It to Beaver, like the culture at large, like the control on the educational system. I mean, I was taken to an entirely new level of understanding after reading Brave New World. Now, again, I was a humanist because that's what my parents taught me to be. I was an existentialist. That's what they taught me to be. I was taught to look down on religion, and I was specifically taught to look down on the Christian religion. because my parents were thinkers, okay? And my parents taught me that Christians were old-fashioned people, superstitious people, the kind of people that would be, wearing suits and baptizing people in some southern state by the water, and singing Christian hymns. And then they told me that Christians were like anti-sex, anti-joy, and anti-knowledge. And, being young, I just believed my parents. I just accepted it. Anyway, I was not a Christian. But what happened to me after reading Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, where it was like being hit with lightning, and I had a level of understanding unfold before my eyes that I never had before. That was, I believe, to this day, even though it appeared to be a secular experience, I believe that secular experience of being like hit with a lightning bolt after reading Brave New World contained the call of God for my life. I believe that the call of God for my life was embedded in that lightning bolt experience of reading Brave New World. And I believe that God in His grace was reaching out to me in a way that I could understand, being raised a humanist and a secular humanist and an atheist. So what God embedded in my heart was a divine call. I didn't know at 8 years old in the third grade that the day would come years later, after this revolutionary experience I had after reading Brave New World. You could never have convinced me that the day would come where I would be lecturing and speaking and ministering to people and using the warnings in that book as a vital part of my message regarding what's happening to America and the world today. You see, I believe the Lord was behind that lightning bolt experience. It was the beginning of a preparation and an expectation of what He was going to do in my life, something I could never have figured out by myself. And so as the years went by, I began to reconnect, if you will, with many of the intellectual leaders, the movers and shakers and thinkers that I would read about, or I would read their books, like Aldous Huxley, like Dr. Timothy Leary, like George Orwell of 1984, like H.G. Wells of The Invisible Man and Invaders from Mars, on and on and on. Many of these people I would encounter physically, or I would find myself living literally in the house a couple of houses down from where they lived, like in the Hollywood Hills. Just strange circumstances. And then when I went to the University of Missouri, I majored in a dual major, filmmaking, and a brand new field under the umbrella of the Department of Psychology at the University of Missouri, which was altered states of consciousness. Now, who takes altered states of consciousness as a major? Well, back then you would have to have been insane. But God was guiding me, because altered states of consciousness and the topic of consciousness in the world today, in both the academic community, among young people, among quantum physicists, among neuropsychiatrists, perhaps one of the hottest fields of study, experimentation, and research is happening in the field now popularly known as altered states of consciousness or consciousness. So, my world was revolutionized. And so when I was saved miraculously at the University of Missouri, you've heard that, it's in my books, the full testimony, the building blocks of my salvation, as well as my rebellion from Christianity, my rebellion from Jesus Christ, the hatred I had for Jesus Christ. And I never really hated Jesus Christ in the sense of I didn't have a personal dislike for Him, but I was told that He represented a religion of oppression, if you will. It's not really that I hated Jesus. I always, even though I was an atheist, an agnostic, and somebody heavily involved in what back then was called the New Age movement, I always had a soft spot for Jesus Christ. Anyway, a series of miracles happened as I was fleeing from a Christian religious retreat about an hour outside of the campus of the University of Missouri. I had what could only be remotely described as a field of dreams experience on the back roads of Missouri in the middle of nowhere. I had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ, which was so overwhelming that it rocked my world and rocked my life. My world is still rocking My world is still rolling. I know that sounds cheesy. I apologize. I'm not recording a music video, but my world is still rocking and rolling from that supernatural. Yeah, and it was full on, full tilt boogie, supernatural experience with Jesus Christ that was so mind blowing that no matter how hard I tried to escape it or rationalize it away, the events that happened to me hitchhiking on the back roads of Missouri, when you read the entire account in the books, is so mind blowing that, I mean, it's so outrageous what happened to me that I probably would be doubtful if I heard somebody else give my testimony, which has happened to me, by the way. I mean, it was mind blowing. It defied all preconceptions of reality. It was so real beyond real. It was so miraculous yet authentic at the same time that it's very difficult for me to try to describe it in a brief moment. All I can tell you is when I had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ on the back roads of Missouri in a very dynamic way that is mind blowing, it so powerfully impacted my life, and I became born again, which so powerfully impacted my life and overwhelmed my life. Little did I know that all these eclectic experiences that I had would become the building blocks for a response to the call of God in my life, which I believe happened in third grade after reading Brave New World. And then after, a decade or so after that, when I was attending the University of Missouri, I had that miraculous encounter with Jesus Christ. And there was no question that Jesus was God. And so that has energized me to this very moment. I carry the fires in my heart of not only a burning message about the reality of Jesus Christ, the reality of salvation, the reality of heaven. Not only do the fires of that reality burn in my heart supernaturally, but on top of that, I explain the Bible like Revelation, where there's the depiction of the one world government, one world religion, one world economic system, Mystery Babylon in Revelation. But that entire depiction is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 11, where we see the world's first account of a viable new world order, a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economic system. And all of this is important to understanding the future, the last days, and Bible prophecy. So I carry with me this multi-tiered message where these different stratas of ideas and philosophy and economics and everything else are analyzed for the purpose of preparing people for what's to come and for the purpose of inviting them intelligently to receive eternal life in Jesus Christ. And so that's why I can say that my call from God began at 8 years old in third grade after reading Brave New World. So, I mean, I'm even shortening it for you now. I'm not going to tell you how many years that I've been involved in this call from God, but it's been a lifetime, okay? That's the truth. That's the truth. Me talking by God's direction about things like the New World Order, one world currency, and all the rest of the stuff that I talk about. I have been carrying out this ministry for at minimum 50 years. And the truth of the matter is, if I really counted the beginning at the true beginning, which was third grade, 8 years old, it would be decades longer than that. I've been doing this seemingly forever. And guess what? I've never run out of energy. I'm always motivated. I'm always energized. And the Spirit of God is always moving through my life, good, bad, or ugly. And the fruit of this and the results of this are in the number and volume of souls saved, people delivered, people returning to Christ after backsliding, platforms that the Lord has opened up for me to minister on, which have allowed me to reach before the censorship bots were unleashed against the truth tellers. Because I was on stuff like Fox News Network, Fox Business Channel in its golden days, and doing radio, a nationally syndicated radio show for 10 years live, that just dominated market after market after market. The sum total of this is, after many years of doing this, writing books, I forgot how many books I've written. I literally have forgotten. I think it's 237 books. and all the articles and all the videos and all the interviews and all the audio programs. I've been running the race in order to warn people about the threat of a brave new world, which is very real, especially Christians, because they will be the target of a brave new world. And we do have this brave new world rising in front of us. It's just called the Great Reset, or the New World Order, its former name. These are clear and present dangers, and so I warn about them, and I never cease to tire from doing this. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to present a false impression of myself. I am not saying for one moment that I don't get tired. I'm not saying that I don't feel defeated at times. I'm not saying that I don't suffer these same ebb and flows that you suffer. I don't want to portray myself as some kind of, spiritual Superman. That would be dishonest. Everything that I'm telling you about has happened because of the grace of God, unmerited favor, and because God pours out his Spirit on me and you or anybody who asks him to do so. And so I want to emphasize that. None of this has to do with some unique virtue that I have, or some unique holiness that I have, or something that I can take glory in myself over. None of it has to do with that. Everything has to do with the unmerited favor or grace of God. And God has been good to me even though I have not deserved it all the time, just like he's good to you and you don't always deserve it. That's the point I want to stress, because I live in the real world, you live in the real world, and I don't want to pretend in being some kind of make-believe person any more than you do. So I ask you to join me. We're in the fight for our lives, by the way. We need to wake up the people of America, especially the body of Christ. They're still sleeping. I've been doing this for a lifetime, and they're still sleeping. Well, we know what's going to happen eventually if they still sleep. But God gave me a prophetic dream on July 4th, 2025. And in part of that dream, and it was a dream, a prophetic dream, it was a prophetic dream that was a follow-up to a prophetic dream, a prophetic vision I had on July 4th, 2012. July 4th, 2012 was a prophetic vision about America. 13 years later, because I don't glibly use the word vision and dream, 13 years later, I had a prophetic dream where the Lord spoke to me in the prophetic dream about what was coming to America. And there's a lot to that dream, but I'll give you just a little bit of it, which is God said to me that he's giving his people in America one last chance to change the direction of our nation, to pray for revival and to facilitate and pray in a biblical great awakening and a biblical revival. God is giving his people one last chance, or the Great Reset, the New World Order, whatever you want to call it, the brave new world will dominate all of us in slavery. And that's a very sobering message from the Lord. But that's what the Lord told me. One last chance. That's it. Not out of cruelty, but God has given chance after chance after chance after chance. You know it and I know it. So the other thing the Lord told me was that he showed me inside of the prophetic dream, he showed me an end times vision regarding America and the world in the last days. And so we need to communicate this message to as many people as fast as we can so that they will wake up spiritually. And when a person is truly awakened spiritually, it allows them to be awake psychologically and humanly. And this is what we must do, because what is coming is a mind-controlled tyranny on a level that is beyond what you read about in sci-fi novels. This technology and these technologies that I talk about, that for crying out loud, Aldous Huxley warned about. I think Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1923. He must have had a time machine because his understanding of the future was mind-blowing. So together we can do this. This was the message, the command that God gave the Bible-believing Christians, the Bible-believing Pilgrims, the Bible-believing Puritans, who used the Bible as the text for establishing an American dream. What God also said to me in the prophetic dream I had on July 4th, 2025, he said he wanted his people, his children, to restore the American dream. Now, That's not far-fetched. That's right on target. The reason God wants to have his people restore the American dream is because, and I won't go into it now, the American dream has become, for people all around the world who come to America, the American dream is a physical, you can put your hands on it, it's a physical idea, it's a physical expression of what a little bit of the kingdom of heaven that's located in heaven might look like if heaven was on the earth in a small degree. So the dream of owning your own house, for example, with a white picket fence, the dream of owning your own car, being married and having children, your own home, your own house, your own job, that is a modest dream. And yet people are fighting to get it now because of the infiltration in our society of totalitarian ideas. Marxist ideas are suppressing the American dream. So we have to understand that the Pilgrims and Puritans, because they studied the Bible constantly, God was able to birth the American dream through the minds and hearts of the Pilgrims and Puritans. Again, for people all around the world, when they think of the American dream, they think of Christianity, what Christianity produces, they think of freedom, they think of prosperity, and they think of opportunity. The American dream is, in its biblical essence, the American dream is the opposite of the nightmarish totalitarian dreams of communism, Marxism, and Brave New World and the Great Reset. So only God's people can restore the American dream. It's not some peripheral issue. It's front and center. It's front and center because people come to America because they believe in the American dream. Now, we don't in America, most of us don't appreciate the American dream. And on top of that, many of us here in America are finding it harder and harder to realize the American dream. All of this has to be adjusted. And that is true Christianity, by the way. So we need to do what God has called us to do. Now, in a moment, I'm going to play you a message that was given at one of the most powerful globalist organizations in the world. And that should solidify for you just how deep and fierce the spiritual battle that we're currently in is really all about. This is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. Join with us with your contributions and donations. We're punished by the advertisers because we warn against things that will kill you. I can't, I forget about the advertising dollars. I'm not interested in making a little subtle trade where I can see my advertising dollars flood into this ministry. But the cost of it is I don't any longer warn you of things you need to be warned about that have life and death consequences. So because that is hurting us in a big way financially, because other people are taking it, I'm not taking it. So I have to rely on God's people. If God's people listen to God, then I have no problem. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll never do that. I will simply ask you to ask the Lord and do whatever it is the Lord tells you to do. Visit paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. Okay, I'm going to play for you a segment of audio that came from a video of a high-level meeting of the World Health Organization, which is connected to the United Nations. And you're going to hear in their own words what their strategy for the future is, what their agenda is. And I want to play it for you, and I want you to listen carefully, because in this message from the World Health Organization, they're talking, the World Health Organization is talking about the fact that we are in the middle of a soft coup, a revolution, a soft revolution, if you will, where there's going to be a radical upheaval of an existing order and the introduction of a new order. This is all part of what's going on in our world right now. And it's imperative that we know what's going on and that we're informed and aware. So let's play that clip from the World Health Organization for you to analyze.
We're undergoing a soft coup. The idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO director and the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove the human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Also, we will be subject, if they can make this work, to vaccines developed in 100 days. We're undergoing a soft coup. The idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO director and the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Also, we will be subject, if they can make this work, to vaccines developed in 100 days. We're undergoing a soft coup.
Okay, this is the Paul McGUIRE report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. You heard from the WHO their plan, their agenda. Now, this plan or agenda interfaces with the UN Agenda 2030. It interfaces with the entire larger globalist agenda, which would be not only the United Nations, but the World Health Organization, which is part of the United Nations, World Health Organization, or WHO. In addition to that, and by the way, the founder of the World Health Organization, there are all these United Nations organizations like WHO, the World Health Organization, and other things. But then the founder of UNESCO, which is it's part of the United Nations. It's one of the key areas of the UN, UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Teaching Organization. UNESCO establishes the global curriculum of what your students will learn in school, what books to read, what ideas they're exposed to. UNESCO controls all of that in America largely and globally. And let's remember that Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World, which powerfully impacted my life as an 8-year-old, his brother was Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley was the father of transhumanism. Julian Huxley was one of the primary signers of what was called the Humanist Manifesto, which was their game plan to transform the world based on humanist principles. And Julian Huxley also was the head of UNESCO. Julian Huxley created Common Core, not for the purpose of educating students to achieve their highest learning abilities. The real purpose of the global curriculum known as Common Core, used in America and all across the world. Common Core is currently a developed system of educating where everyone globally is taught the same thing the same way. But the hidden agenda behind Common Core is that it doesn't educate your child. It socially engineers your child because it dumbs your child down in a very subtle way. And parents are being hoodwinked because they're deceived into thinking that their kids are doing better when in fact their kids are becoming dumber. Here's how Julian Huxley's Common Core works. The whole educational system is revamped to this. The teacher gives a specified message to the students. To the degree that the students memorize exactly what the teacher says, that will make their grades go higher. Then they get a test testing them on, specifically word for word, what was taught by the teacher or what was taught in the textbooks. The textbooks, the teacher, it's all one-way instruction. The student hears, the student listens, and then the student regurgitates back exactly what they were told to think. That's not education. That's called programming or indoctrination. So Common Core is a system of educating, which is not really education. It's social engineering. The students are given Common Core curriculum. It's a one-way lecture through the textbook, through the teacher, and then they're given tests, or they're given mini tests. And the tests, the job of the student is to essentially memorize the Common Core message and then repeat it back word for word on the test or to the teacher. Now, if they do this properly, and properly means you don't question authority, you don't ask questions, you don't deviate from the prescribed pathway, you simply learn and memorize what the teacher and the books are teaching you, and then you regurgitate it back. So, as this process goes on, the students who don't ask any questions, the student who doesn't critically think, the student who doesn't use his brain, in short, the inferior students are the ones that will get promoted in Common Core, because the inferior students are not asking questions, are not thinking about what they've been told as education. And because they don't ask questions and they simply follow orders, that's exactly what the global system wants. The global system wants workers at a cheap price who won't question their orders and will do exactly what they're told to do. A globally compliant lesson plan. That's what Common Core is. And so if you're looking at your student getting all these high marks on tests and quizzes and stuff, and you're all delighted because you're saying, wow, now my kid can get into any school they want. Now my kid will be up for scholarships. Maybe my kid will go to an Ivy League school. Well, yeah, that's true. But you're faced with a dilemma. Your kid now has great grades for the first time in his or her life. But the great grades came about because they learned to conform their minds to Common Core. They stopped asking questions. They stopped thinking. They merely memorized whatever the teacher said they memorized. They memorized what was said in the textbooks. And then when test time came, they simply regurgitated it back word for word. So by functioning as little more than a memory machine, that student who doesn't ask any questions, doesn't think, doesn't really develop their intellect, they get really high test marks because they're not questioning anything. They're just memorizing what they were told to memorize. So they get the great test grades, the great scores, which will open up all kinds of doors for them. So you're faced with a real dilemma as a parent, a challenge, which is you can go for the great test scores, which, one understands that because that way you'll get into the colleges and the better jobs, etc. But the price tag is your child will be dumbed down. The price tag is your child will receive social engineering under the guise of education and will essentially be dumbed down. So you're going to have to, as a parent, think boldly, think biblically, and think creatively, and pray to the Lord. If you just lay down and allow yourself to be rolled over by what is essentially a totalitarian methodology of teaching, your child is going to pay the price in that in the long term of life, they won't have the capacity to think aggressively, to analyze, to use logic and reason at the level that real life requires. But if your goal is just to program a robot that will fit into some kind of mechanized global system, well, then Common Core is your choice. So I'm not going to answer it for you. I know what I did as a parent, or we did as parents, and you're faced with a challenge, but you need to be aware of it. You're going to have to balance the challenge of it appears that the Common Core system will only give your child good grades or excellent grades if they simply regurgitate back what it was requested that they memorize in the classroom or through the textbooks. That will help your child get the grades they need. But the bad side of this, and the downside is, your child will not have the intellectual abilities that are available to him or her that come about through thinking, logic, reason, and exercising thinking, logic, and reason. Now, you may have to compromise, but compromise should never mean that you're giving up the entire future of your children just to get good grades. And I'm not even saying you should necessarily compromise. I'm simply saying is you better think about it, and whatever choice you make, you may come to a place where there's no perfect choice. A lot of people say, well, I homeschooled, I did this, I did that. Well, that's all contingent upon whether or not you have the money and the opportunity and the training to be able to do that. The fact of the matter is a lot of children don't have that. And there's far more to it than that. There are reasons. There's a reason why American schools and the schools in the state of California are among the lowest test scores of any nation on planet Earth. So despite the fact that America spends billions of dollars on education and public education, despite that fact, America continues to, year after year after year after year, it continues to produce students that are on the bottom barrel, the bottom of the list in terms of education and actually knowing something. I mean, that's pretty bad. We're one of the most powerful, innovative nations of any nation on planet Earth. Yet year after year after year, this has been going on for decades, especially in places like California, which has, among all the states of the Union, I believe California is still the lowest, the students that go to the California schools, I believe, still have the lowest test scores of any state or city in the nation. Now, you need to find a way through or around that. It's going to take a little bit of work. It took us a lot of work. I had to read books. I had to watch videos. I had to teach myself from a knowledge of zero. I had to have a good knowledge of Common Core from credible sources. And one of the credible sources I had was I listened to videos and talks and read stuff written by a lady who was one of the originators and founders of Common Core in America. And then she radically changed her mind. She changed it 180 degrees. And now she's trying to educate parents everywhere of the learning dangers of Common Core. And so I heard her argument. Plus I had to read the arguments of those that were promoting Common Core. Now for me, it was a no-brainer. It was clear that Common Core was designed to socially engineer your children, period. It doesn't have your children's best interests in mind. So the next question is, what do you do about it? And that required an entire series of learning things that we had to learn. It's not easy whatever way you go, but remember, you're dealing with your child's future. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Be sure to visit us at paulmcguire.us. Spread this message far and wide.